Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. So this is one of Wild Apricot's monthly expert webinars, and today we're honored to have Margaret Sumption on with us. Margaret is an expert in conflict resolution, and particularly when it comes to nonprofit organizations. And if you've ever had to deal with the internal politics or interpersonal issues at your organization, and really, who hasn't? I want to say that you've joined the right webinar because, of course, as we all know, it's really frustrating, to say the least, when these kinds of issues get in the way of what we're all trying to achieve with our organizations, and we just want to pursue our purpose and fulfill our mission and all of that, and some of these things get in the way, and that can be frustrating. The good news for today is that Margaret has pretty much been there and seen it all, and she's going to share the unique approach that she's used with nonprofits all across the country to help them turn conflict into growth. And, I'm looking forward to, as I hope you are, to hearing Margaret today. So we're really glad that she could join us. We'll bring her on very shortly. In the meantime, I want to briefly introduce myself. Okay, that's my face on the left of your screen there, and I'm on the Wild Apricot content team, and beside me is my colleague Rano, and despite that you see a picture of him holding a snake, he's one of the most gentle creatures that I know. Anyway, he'll be here on chat to help you with any technical issues you might have. So during the webinar, feel free to ask any questions to us or to Margaret, and to do that, you can use the chat box. And I want to make a couple of quick reminders before moving on. First, I want to let you know that we are recording the session, and we'll be sending you an email with a link to the recording within the next couple of days, so you can watch out for that. I also want to let you know that by attending today, you are eligible to earn 1 CAE credit. And okay, well, we'll get going in just another couple minutes, but let me briefly say that today's webinar is being brought to you by Wild Apricot. And I know that many of our customers are on with us today, so welcome to all of you. And I know that many of you attend, our webinars on a regular basis, so we're really happy to have you. I also know that we have many people here who aren't familiar to Wild Apricot, new to our world, and I want to say a big hello to you as well. And for those of you who don't know, Wild Apricot is membership management software. It's actually an all-in-one solution for anyone running a membership organization. And that's because you can manage your member and contact database. You can run your events, build your website, process all your payments, and more. And many of our customers consider it a lifesaver for them because they're able to save hours and hours each day in all that kind of administrative stuff, and freeing them up to focus on fulfilling their organization's mission. And we're quite thrilled with what many of our clients have been able to accomplish. We've watched many of them grow since we started 10 years ago, and they've watched us grow too. And I'd like to say that thanks to our customers, we've been ranked as the #1 rated membership management software solution on the market for the last few years running. And while we pride ourselves on helping people with great software, we're also a leading provider of free educational content, which you'll find on our blog and in webinars like we're having today. So, and if I want to say as well, if anyone has any questions specifically about Wild Apricot, we're happy to answer them at the end of the webinar. So you're all free to stick around if you have the time to join us. Rano will stay on and answer any questions you have specifically about Wild Apricot. So now I'd like to introduce today's presenter. There's, you can see Margaret Sumption on your screen now. And Margaret Sumption is a 35-year veteran in association, government, and nonprofit leadership, and she brings quite a lot of expertise to the table. She was educated as a special education teacher and school counselor. She is certified as a mental health professional with their LPC, that's Licensed Professional Counselor designation. She's also a certified senior human resources professional with their SPC, that's her senior certified professional designation from the Society for Human Resources Management. She also has her SPHR, and that's a senior professional in human resources designation from the Human Resources Certification Institute. I think I got all that right. Anyway, she has quite a lot of letters after her name, which helps make her, a tour de force, really an invaluable resource to nonprofit professionals all over the country. And that explains why that in her business, Sumption and Wyland, Margaret has worked for 26 years nationally in board development, governance, strategic planning, team training, and of course conflict management, and that's the area that she's going to focus on today. I should add that on top of her work with organizations, Margaret also coaches in individual executives and helping them develop as leaders. And as you can imagine, Margaret is a sought-after keynote speaker and trainer, and we feel pretty lucky that she's joining us today. So without any further ado, I would like to bring on Margaret. Margaret, I want to say big welcome to you. It's wonderful to have you here with us today. Thanks for all that you've done with me over the weeks preparing for this and for being here this afternoon. And I'm going to pass the presentation over to you now, just right after I mute myself, so give me 1 second.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I'm looking forward to the time we have together, and I'm very hopeful that we will be able to have questions. I want to entertain any questions that I can, and I'm just waiting for just a moment for Donald to release the slides to me, and once that happens, then I will be able to move and advance the slides forward. As he's working toward that effort, let me just start out by saying that we are going to talk about conflict resolution and conflict management today. So with that, Donald, I'm getting control of the clicker here, but not able to advance slides. So just give me some understanding of time on that, please. There we go. We are on. Thank you very much. We're going to talk today about the 7 strategies to start right in relationships so that we don't have broken relationships within our teams and systems. But we always have to remember our people are people. But we have to know ourselves exceptionally well. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk about positive sentiment and how positive sentiment override can create a positive environment for your work. We're going to talk a little bit about the rule book of how to work and how to listen with the intent to be influenced, and how to look at conflict resolution and conflict management in the most highly cooperative and highly assertive ways. We're also going to talk about choosing successful over right and taking some ownership. And then we're going to follow up with a little bit of how do we reframe broken relationships when we find them. So as we move forward with the slides, and I think the slides are just taking a little bit of time to advance here, forcing me to get ahead of them just a little bit. And I would be more than happy for Donald to, there we go, we're moving forward. Brene Brown, who might be somebody you have heard talk, she wrote the book Daring Greatly. She's written several other books. When we talk about the issues of conflict resolution, of management, of managing an association, we have to remember that people are hardwired for connection. They want to engage with others. They want to do what's right. They want to have purpose and meaning in their lives. And if they don't have it, they're suffering. And as we look at association management, we have to remember one basic premise. We are all here for a mission. We all are committed to that mission. And I don't think that most of us get up in the morning saying, I'm going to make that person's life miserable today. But what we end up doing sometimes is making lives miserable for others, and sometimes making lives miserable for ourselves. So first and foremost, as we start this process and this journey, we have to remember it starts with us. We have to know ourselves exceptionally well. We have to be prepared to ask ourselves, what does success look like? What is the stage I want to set up for a successful relationship? By asking ourselves, what do I want for myself? What do I want for others? What do I want the perfect environment to look like? And then, very critically, how can I be the person who sets the stage to say, how can I create a healthy and peaceful working team? Because it really does, in the end, all start with us. Our attitude, our perception, our approaches, our willingness to listen, our willingness to listen deeply and understand the needs of others. Because in looking at that, it's important for us to step back and say, what is the premise point? What is the why of how people either get along and work collaboratively together or have a contentious environment? And I'm going to specifically focus our conversation today around the boardroom and the leadership of your organization. But everything I talk about transcends to the entire membership of your organization as well. And I want to start out today talking a little bit about creating a successful outcome by looking at positive sentiment override. Now, positive sentiment override is really, it comes from the research work of a researcher by the name of John Gottman. John Gottman is that guy. You know how we always like to go back to the research as we look at the framing elements of psychological principles and really deep understanding. And John Gottman, in his research, he was the researcher who identified the 27 micro-expressions of emotion. And all of those FBI stories you see on TV, when you hear about, you know, if you're looking down and to the left, you must be lying. And if you're looking up and to the right, you must be looking into the future and prescribing the future. Well, he's the guy who developed that. But he developed a very important basic structure of understanding how people view the world. He said, one, we are hardwired for connection. And the current research of Brené Brown brings that full circle in her sociological research to his psychological principles. He also says that most relationships start out positive. On the green, if you notice that little green man on the left, and then we behave. And that behavior sets the stage for whether or not that relationship will stay positive or will become negative. But we have to also realize that some relationships start out with a reputation. They start out with a reputation of, I know that guy. I know he's difficult to work with. I have a preconceived notion of who he is. And as we think about that, we have to also step back and say, how are we engaging in behavior that either acts to add to the positive sentiment we have about a person or detracts from our positive regard? And so as you're thinking about that and you meet a new person, maybe it's a new board member coming in to your association leadership ranks, or you've hired a new executive director who comes highly regarded and is going to be a part of your organization and your partner as a board as you work in your association management structure. Every interaction, every contribution, every time we interact with that person, whether it be by text message, by email, or by or in person, we either act to add to the positive sentiment we have for that other person to have of us, or to us have of them, or it detracts from that. And we have to remember that we have the power to maintain a positive sentiment relationship. I want to share a little story about that just happened to me yesterday. I got a phone call from a client. She usually emails me, and I'd emailed her my final bill for a strategic planning process I had just done for their nonprofit organization. And she sounded apprehensive and upset on the phone and said, "Margaret, you're still willing to work with us, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, Corey, why? Of course I am." And she said, "Well, your email sounded so much like it was closure, like our relationship had ended. And that isn't what we want. We want you to continue working with us to the next step." And I said, "Well, Corey, I am so sorry." But I said, my intent was simply to close out. After all, I was sending you the bill. I kind of said, this is the closure of this contractual relationship. But I had no intention of saying it was the closure of my relationship with them. My sentiment override in an email, unintended, could have derailed my relationship with that client. I'm just so glad that Corey, that executive director, said, "I'm going to call her on the phone and find out." Had she not done that, we would have lived with that negative sentiment. We have to remember that it's all about the positive sentiment that we have in people. Do we believe they're there to do the right thing, even if they make some bad decisions? Do we believe that they have our best interests at heart and the best interests of our association at heart, even when they behave a little bit counter to that? And so I bring up the four horsemen. And again, I go back to John Gottman. And I'll very much encourage you to just simply Google John Gottman and the Four Horsemen, and you'll see some really interesting descriptions of this. But John Gottman says that there are 4 ways to break down a relationship. And I'm using this information as a precursor to getting ready to stop some of these things from happening in your association. He says that there are 4 behaviors that if we see them, we are breaking down relationships. The first is defensiveness. And essentially defensiveness is that interesting thing we always put in the email when we say, you know, I would have gotten back to you earlier, except this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. Well, all the receiver of that email is going to see is that you had a lot of things more important than that person, and that isn't necessarily the message you intended to send, but that was the message that was received. Don't defend yourself. When you own it and say, I am so sorry, I am late in getting back to you, simply say that. To act defensively and tell people all the sometimes rational reasons, you know, the dog ate my homework, it's still defensiveness. So refrain from that, especially when you're engaged in email or text message conversation with a person. It's so easy for that to be misconstrued. And sometimes it's we act to criticize when we know that that's not our intent, but it sounds that way. When you say, you know what, you didn't get that done on time and that's why I'm late, you're essentially criticizing that person. And it is acting to break down the relationship. Work as hard as you can to talk about what is the next step of moving forward instead of to criticize. Stonewalling is just that wonderful reaction of staying quiet in the meeting and having the conversation after the meeting and telling your colleagues all the things you should have said in the meeting, but were unwilling to do so. And if any of you who have ever lived anywhere near around a 13-year-old, contempt is the other one. And that contempt is easy to see on a 13-year-old. That's when the eye roll and the huffing goes on. Just the really, and the eye roll that says, you are beneath me and I don't want to be, you don't even have, shouldn't even have my listening ear. Be very, very careful with that powerful sentiment override and not to allow it to get in and break down relationships. So up till now, we've talked about the readiness for a good organizational team. Remember, this is about you. Do you have a positive sentiment override going into your relationships with others? Are you acting always to be positive in contributing to that sentiment, positive elements, or are you detracting? And then we can move to understanding that creating a rule book is the most positive thing you can do. Getting ahead, making the rules when you're happy so that you can implement them when you're not. Critical, important work. And one of the least attended to tasks of any nonprofit organizational leadership group, or any group of volunteers, or any professional management association. We don't need the rules. The rules are for other people. We know what we're doing, and we can go on and not put those rules in place. I'm telling you, it is the best investment you'll ever make. Because when we create positive rules of engagement, we are setting a rule book for the work. And we are making those rules when we're happy and can talk about them freely and comfortably so that we can implement them when we're not. And first and foremost, the most beneficial element is to write a job description. What is the job of being a board member? What is the job of being a committee chair? What is the role of the executive director? Not just that job description that you used to hire that person, but truly what are the key elements of job performance, of engagement with the board, of roles and responsibilities in setting up and carrying out the conference that you're going to have next week or next year. Who does what, when, where, how, will indeed set the stage for a much more positive and peaceful environment where more things get done. You need to create step-by-step policy, process, and implementation. If you consider how are we going to get the work done? What are our benchmarks? What are our cadence? What are our activities in order to align with success? And what are our policies? Where are the boundaries? If we do this up front, we create an environment where we can have successful outcomes. And successful outcomes mean that you don't have contentious problems, disappointments, differences of opinion to deal with when the stakes are high. We can get all of that through policy and process and job description process before we ever get started on a project. Then we create an environment for successful project management by creating a charter of work. And I'll use that example. I've had the wonderful experience, and I say that with a little bit of twinge in my voice, that wonderful experience of heading up and being on the working end of building a conference for a couple of hundred people who are traveling, some of them hundreds of miles, to come to a conference. Maybe it's a statewide conference, and you have all of the elements that need to happen and all the things that need to happen. Many different teams, many of them dispersed from each other, using phone conference calling and such to do their work, to bring it all together. Well, having a charter of work can really make the stakes much lower on the relationship value detractor scale by simply setting up a high quality charter of work so that you can design, develop, analyze, and evaluate each element of the process so you're ahead of schedule, instead of having someone drop the ball and then having to pick it up and make it move on and sometimes in a jerky motion, or worse yet, getting to that conference, having 200 people show up and having it be noted that someone forgot either to tell the presenter when they were presenting or forgot to tell them to show up at all is not going to be a part of your life and something that you have to, shall we say, conflict manage within your association. So if we set the stage through a well-crafted job description and roles and responsibilities of the team of people, and I mean so deeply as volunteer chairs, committee chairs, board membership, ranking board membership, board leadership, literally job descriptions for each of those elements is time well spent. Setting up a structure, policy, procedures, boundaries, and systems. And then fully going back to identify and align what is the work we are trying to accomplish, what is that charter of work, and then ultimately, what do we do if a problem happens? And that brings me to the identification of you have to have a process to decide how you're going to decide stuff. And I like to use a 6-question plan, which says, you know, is it a problem is what it starts out with. But what is the problem? What exactly is the problem that's engaged? And sometimes this has to happen on the fly, but hopefully we're ahead of the game in all of our work and processing so that when we're proactive, we don't have to be reactive. But we have to ask ourselves then, what is the real problem? Do we have a failure of communication among committees or processes, or do we have, is our charter of work not well crafted? Do we have policies and procedures that are not well in place? What is the real problem? And then why is that problem existing? What is our plan? And then what's our strategy for executing? You can use this problem-solving technique at any aspect of your organizational work. It works in your board meeting as you're trying to set your strategic plan objectives, when things aren't working the way they're supposed to be working, when revenue isn't coming in the way it's supposed to be coming in, when expenses are exceeding what the expected cost, and we need to be presenting forward and creating and crafting contingency planning for our organization. You have to decide how you're going to decide. It's part of a good rule book. And again, if we make those rules when we're happy, we can implement them when we're not. By making these structures and putting these structures in place. And that comes in addition to setting accountability measures, assessing conflicts when they happen. Why are they in place? Being proactive in managing those conflicts. And then very, very importantly, setting the stage to measure results and move forward. Nothing is more off-putting, and that's one of the reasons I really like this cartoon slide that I selected here, is that we're all in the same boat. And if the boat isn't going to float, ultimately we're all going to get wet. And so if we set rules when we're happy, if we set our mind and our hearts on a positive, proactive sentiment, and then get ahead of those issues when we're happy, we can then celebrate, and we can celebrate outcomes together in a meaningful way. And I want to very clearly identify that probably the biggest challenge that I find for nonprofit organizations, for membership organizations, is we don't celebrate enough together anymore. There was a time when that ceremony was far more active in our association life. It is critically important to celebrate the membership of our board members as they come onto the organization. Celebrate their tenure, and whether it means a plaque, a rose in a vase, or a simple thank you and a box of candy. Nothing is more gratifying than to celebrate the work and contributions of each member, and then ultimately to celebrate together. Those are the rule book that if we have it proactively, we can have a better outcome. And so I'm going to take a moment right now to ask Donald if any questions have come up, if you've had any questions that you've put in. This would be an opportunity to answer some questions that you might have now that you've listened a little bit to the proactive side of conflict management. Any questions that have come up?
Yeah, just unmuting myself here, so I took control over the mouse, Margaret. Yeah. Yes, there are actually a couple questions. So when does it go from feedback to criticism? Oh, more questions are flooding in, but I actually think this is a great question. When does it go from feedback to criticism?
Well, you know, I think that everything depends on posture, demeanor, tone of voice, and delivery. We have to remember that, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes, and so I'll just give you a little heads up. We're going to talk about conflict communication in just a couple of minutes, where I'll specifically go into the elements about how to create an assertive but cooperative communication so that we don't slip over the edge. But I think the important element of your question here is best answered by saying, when you're perceiving, if you're the deliverer of the recommendations or the feedback to another person, and you start getting a reaction from that person that presents discomfort, negative posture, stop, reframe, refresh before you go on.
Great. And then a few more, just trying to watch the questions as they come in. Well, here's one. Can you give examples of the content of a rule book?
Okay, the contents of a rule book should have clear job descriptions for every primary position in the organizational leadership structure. The job description can be as simple as 4 or 5 key deliverables and action step requirements, all the way to very deep job descriptions. I have many, many examples for associations and can provide those for you. There are several organizational resource systems out there that I could direct you to as well to get good examples. That's the first step. The second step is policy, procedure, and system. Who does what? What are our policies around that? When does decisions need to come to the full board, for example, would be a policy that your board should set when it's happy. And those policies, procedures, and systems also include then when are the boundaries that you have to elevate up to the next level of decision-making authority before that can go forward. The third element is a structural process for how are we going to make decisions? What is our project management process? How are we going to manage individual projects? How do we set leadership? How do we set timelines and structure together? How do we measure outcomes? How do we measure our results? And then what is our process for post-event, post-process analysis? And then what is our process for celebration? How are we going to recognize positive outcomes?
And then maybe we'll take a couple more, and then we'll do Q&A near the end as well, right? So so here is one. How can you deal with a problematic board member that looks at all events as personal attacks? And then will you be discussing the process of bringing them back into the fold?
Yes, I will. And, I kind of refer to these as the bristly types or the barnacle types. My glass is half empty and broken. And so, yes, we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll also talk about how to carry out a crucial conversation with that person if that person is damaging the capacity of your organization moving forward. How do we come to an understanding of a necessary ending? And I will be talking a little bit about that toward the end of this presentation when I talk about managing challenging relationships and managing bruised relationships.
Okay, one more quick one, and we can move on. So how do you deal, so a quick one, I don't know how quick the answer will be, but how do you deal with a poor listener?
How about we go to the next slide and I'll tell you, because that's exactly what's on my next slide. Are you ready for me to continue?
Take over control, just click enter and you can move the slides.
Thank you. As I just mentioned, the next slide upcoming, as I'm popping here, let's see, let's go for, there we go. One of the biggest challenges that we have is people don't listen very well. And when I say people don't listen very well, none of us listen very well. And so I'm challenging each of you to consider when we want to put that label on another person, how good are our listening capacities? We must always listen with the intent to be influenced. And I have a coaching client of mine who actually has this slide posted on, kind of hanging on the bottom of his computer screen. So when he's on the phone or he's in a meeting with people, he has to literally remind himself, I have to listen here. I have to actively turn in. And there's an interesting little side note. I would say if you want to know how good a listener you are, look at your feet. When you're in engagement with another person, are your feet pointed out the door? Are your feet pointed in another direction and you're simply turning back and giving a person your attention for a moment, but not your full attention? Listen with your feet. Turn. Having direct posture with another person makes sure that you're a good listener. The act of doing that will increase the likelihood of that other person being a better listener as well. There are some wonderful elements around that that are very important. Active listening techniques, reframing. Did I hear you say that? And reframing what that person has said. You're honoring them by saying, I listened to you, I heard you, and do I have it, did what I hear have an accuracy about it? So one of the things that often, if you find a person is a poor listener, up your listening game. Go front and center with them, full posture with them, your feet pointed toward them. And you can't do that if you're not in person. So if you've got a really bad listener on your hands, make sure you're having those communications in person if at all possible. And one of the elements around that is to always consider how you are managing conflict. Now, I want to give a preface here to this slide. When I talk about aiming high and right, I want you to think for a moment. Look at this axis of a slide. And I'm going to use the term passive-aggressive. How many times have we heard that? And I want you to ask yourself, if a person is passive-aggressive, where they might be sitting on this grid. If you noted that they would be sitting in that lower left-hand corner, you're absolutely right. Passive, meaning they're not engaged with other people. They're holding it in. They're avoiding. They are uncooperative if you look at the bottom axis of that scale. So when someone identifies a person as passive-aggressive, they're in the lower left-hand corner. So that makes sense then to say aim high and right. Get out of the corner. That passive-aggressive person might be that person as well that's when you really push their buttons just hard enough, they'll fly right past assertiveness, right into aggressiveness on the left-hand side of the scale, into competition and into high-blown competitiveness with you. So when I say in every communication, we must always restore as much as possible the highest assertiveness. You can't change the game if you're not in it. And high cooperativeness. So just for a moment, if you are a person who's very cooperative, but you aren't very assertive, you sit with your arms folded in the meeting, someone might notice that you're not happy with the conversation that's happening, but you choose to say nothing. You are over on the right-hand side, on the lower right-hand side, simply accommodating. That accommodation often will move you toward just checking out, not being a part of the outcomes. We know that none of us can be successful with that. Now, I had an opportunity to attend a conflict management seminar where the presenter asked us to write down our definition of that word right in the middle, compromising. And he said, "What's your definition of compromise?" And I, of course, being one of those very assertive people, said, "Well, the definition of compromise is half a loaf. Each of us gets a half of what we want." And he said, "Well, let me tell you my definition of compromise. Join me in failure. Neither one of us got what we wanted. Neither one of us has a complete loaf of bread. And neither one of us is going to be fully happy with the outcome. Instead, we should go to high and right, which is seeking out in the conversation, highly assertive and highly cooperative, and aiming high and right to get an outcome that is better than either you or I could have accomplished alone. You can't do this without being in the game, and you can't do this without being highly cooperative, even when you rather have a testy sort. Which brings us to the next element of our work together. And that is really understanding that we have two choices in the world. We can be right, or we can be successful. We get to decide. We must decide. And when we're dealing with testy people, the first thing we have to do is let go of the rope. We have to not get in a tug of war of right and wrong with individuals who are very, very contentious, win-lose kind of people. Step back, step away, and say, what do we need to have to be successful? Because I don't need to be right, but we know that in order for the association to move forward, we must be successful. And how can we accomplish that? Well, we can do that a couple of ways. I always say, when in doubt, breathe. When in doubt, think, breathe, then deliver. I have a personal rule. If I'm upset with someone, I'm not allowed to touch a keyboard for 24 hours. If someone has hurt my feelings or has not followed through on a commitment they've made to me, literally a 24-hour rule, no device other than my voice is available to me. Always think about how we can follow a 24-hour written correspondence rule not to get ourselves in further trouble with an individual, even if that individual deserves it. And so, this is the part where you breathe, step back, let go of the anger, let go of the disappointment. Always think first, what's the good of my organization? What is the good for me as an individual? What's good for the organization? What's good for moving the ball forward? Let's practice that and then deliver that. We need to find time to breathe before reacting. So often when we find ourselves in that negative space with another individual who is looking for a fight, we have to be the one to stop, wait, let it go, and say, let's take this up at another time. Let's plan a time when you and I'll sit down and manage that together. I have a mentee of mine who she identifies me as her mentor in the world, and she said, Margaret, this goes through my head every single day. No one ever has to apologize for something they didn't say. So think about that, because negative people need drama like oxygen, and they use it like oxygen. If we stay positive, if we identify that, we will take that breath away. And so it's critical for us to move forward always with that sentiment in place. And there are people, and that's why I put this slide in here, even though it's a little bit busy. There are people in the world who are hurt. They're angry. They're fearful. They feel as though they are not engaged with others. And, we'd like to be able to tell them that it's mostly their attitude that's getting in their way. But sometimes that doesn't really get us the desired result. We have to remember that if we have, and you see those feelings that are on the left-hand side, that person becomes hostile, controlling, punishing, judgmental, resentful. Am I labeling a person who might be engaged on your board? Think back and say, what is driving these feelings? And how can I identify a way to move away from those feelings and create engagement? Reduce that person's feeling of abandonment or shame or guilt or neediness or fearfulness. What can I do to create a positive element moving forward? Because letting go gives us freedom. Letting go of, well, that person, it's not, I mean, I could take it personally, but I'm not going to take it personally. Forgiveness is about saying, I didn't know what happened to you before you got here to the meeting today. I don't know what's going on in your life that is causing, and this is what you're talking to in your head. You might not be saying this out loud, but I need to give this person space to express what is it that they need in order to feel whole. And the biggest challenge that I would have for you is that forgiveness is about your own capacity to move forward, not necessarily about saying a person's actions were acceptable. And that's when it comes, and there are times, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, when necessary endings are necessary. And as we engage with that, we have to understand that we have to be the stronger person in these relationships when we find ourselves with people who are hurting us because they are seeking that drama in order to feel good about themselves. One of my mentors said to me, you can't have a fight if you drop your end of the rope. And she actually used this exercise in a training video that she provided for us, where a group of people were pulling that rope across a muddy moat. And he said, what would happen? Would anybody get dirty if someone just dropped their end of the rope? We have to find the things we agree upon. I'm a believer of going back to the mission when you find yourself at odds with a person. And really, maybe even stepping back and reframing when you find a contentious person who's pounding his fist on the table saying, we shouldn't be doing that, and we shouldn't be helping those people because they don't help us, and whatever the situation is, to say, stop. What is our mission here today? This is why leadership is so powerful, because we can say, let's reframe this conversation to, why are we here? What is our mission? What do we need to do? Find the things that we can agree upon. Be assertive. As I said, highly assertive, highly cooperative, and very importantly, be kind. We have to acknowledge that people have been hurt. We have to acknowledge those feelings. But we have to, most importantly, keep our eye on the mission, because the mission is the most critical part of the work that we do. So better you never have a problem that you started, because you've set the rules of engagement up front, you've set the decision-making process in place, you have agreed upon work parameters and work goals, you have agreed upon work deliverables and a timeline. You have champions who are championing that timeline. And what I find often, that by actually acting to over-plan, we can then go through, and that planning happens more seamlessly. Relationships are not bruised. When they are bruised, we have to work to get them back. And I believe a couple of blogs have come to you in anticipation of this webinar today, where I did specifically identify how to manage a bruised relationship and how to get back on track with a bruised relationship. If you find yourself that you've actually stepped on a toe, whether you meant to or not, you have to own it. You have to be assertive and highly cooperative. You have to seek forgiveness. You have to put your chips in the basket. And one of the things, and I think the most common question I get, so I will anticipate this as we open it up for further questions today, this question: The biggest challenge that I believe associations face are what I call the tailgater in meetings. And the tailgater and it's any board, it's a church board. I've been on church boards where you have them. And in fact, my use of the term tailgater comes from my time as a church board trustee, where we would have these fantastic meetings. We would have conversation. We would set a work plan. And then we'd put the food away and all the things and walk out of the church. And here's a man, so I don't know why it's always been a man, because they're driving a pickup truck. Could be a woman as well. And they're standing around the tailgate of the pickup truck, 4 or 5 people, and they're talking about what I should have said and could have said in the meeting. This is, well, a guy should have said that. We say that in my part of the country. A guy should have said this, talking themselves about themselves in third person. And it's like, wait a minute. No. If you're the person around the tailgate, I don't care if you're the listener or the instigator, you're a tailgater, and you are acting to detract from the mission of your organization. Stop it, challenge it, and seek assertiveness in the meetings. If someone's sitting and their body language is telling you they're shut down, the board chair, the leader of that meeting has a responsibility to say, let's talk about what your needs are. Let's let everyone have their point of view expressed before we go forward with the decision. It is the best way, because I would suggest the lack of assertiveness, that passive-aggressive person in the lower left-hand corner, is what keeps many good associations from getting better. So with that, Donald, I will turn it back to you and open for questions and further questions as we move forward.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. We've got quite a few questions already were coming in while you were speaking. So here's one. I like this question. I love the idea of setting up rules during a happy time for 2 people in conflict to abide by. However, 2 staff members involved in grants here are always going head to head. There is no happy time. So how, when do we agree on rules?
Well, there is no happy time. And by that caveat in the question, it sounds as though this is a relationship that has been, shall we say, nitty for quite a while. Sometimes it's necessary to literally go back and break down the relationship to its essence. If these are 2 staff people and they're always at odds with each other, is it because they don't understand the values of your organization? Is it because they don't understand the mission? Do they not have clear understanding of your strategic priorities? Sometimes going back to the mission, the vision, and very importantly, the values, can act to stop people from always finding themselves on the other end of the rope. And then I think, frankly, you need to put this last slide that's in front of you with, you can't have a fight if you drop your end of the rope. Let's figure out how we say what is best for the mission, not what is best for me. Because you'll notice that there is hands on each side of the rope. What if we were pulling together? We could pull that wagon uphill a lot faster.
Take a couple more, and I want to save some time because there is a way that we can keep the conversation going. So maybe we'll just take a couple more now, because I want to get back, I guess, the microphone myself for just before we wrap up at the top of the hour. So quickly, how do you solve divides? We have new employees that started and just came in and started problems. Now it feels like 2 different teams.
Okay. Well, the best time to stop that problem from happening is before it started, which is effective onboarding, again, not knowing all the particulars. When you see it, is to be highly assertive and highly cooperative in bringing people together and acknowledging that a problem exists, acknowledge that a problem is evolving, and that if it is not managed quickly, it will escalate into a problem for the association. What happens if you don't get after those problems really quickly and really set boundaries very quickly, you will find your association becomes more and more polarized. More and more people are picking up each end of the rope, and all of a sudden you've got a full-fledged tug of war on your hands, and you need to stop that as soon as you see it. And the way to stop that, first and foremost, is to acknowledge it, sit down together, and go back to mission. And very importantly, don't stop at mission. Go to your value statements. They are actionable behaviors. If your value statements are not actionable behaviors, you need to reframe and define your values in that way. These are the expected behaviors of our team. These are the things that are standing in the way of that behavior being realized. These are the expectations going forward. Don't wait. The biggest error is to wait too long when you see the divisions cracking. The best place to stop them is to never allow them to happen with highly effective, highly engaged, and deep onboarding of new team members.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to make a couple announcements and tell everybody how we can keep the conversation going. So thank you so much, Margaret. You know, I really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. I personally found it very valuable. And one thing I quickly want to say is that, well, actually, here's your slide here in your website where people can contact you. Rano.
Yes, and
yep.
Yeah, and Donald, I would certainly encourage that anyone who is on the line and email to info@sumptionandwyland.com. Make me say no. You know, if there's something that I can send you, a note of reply that I can make, or any of those elements, I'm more than happy to help you meet your needs, and very much encourage you to be proactive. And one of the ways to be proactive is reach out to me, and I'll try to help.
Great. And then I also want to say that I know there's a lot of questions we couldn't get to. It always happens when we have a webinar and we try to get things done within a short hour. A lot of wisdom to share and a lot of questions. But we do have this wonderful thing called the Wild Apricot Membership group on our Facebook, and Rano is going to put the link in there if you're not already a member, and partake in Facebook and all the social media stuff that you can enjoy there. Please join us. We've got quite a few people that are part of the Wild Apricot family here, and our experts are there, like Margaret, and we're always there to help, and everyone can share stories and in particular ask questions that came up during this webinar, and Margaret has gratefully offered to participate. So there's that I wanted to say, and then as I did say earlier, I wanted to give everyone here a chance, now that we're closing up the top of the hour, to ask any questions you have about Wild Apricot, if you happen to have them. But let me first say that if anyone is interested in, you can take a look at our software for free. We do offer a 30-day free trial, and Rano is going to paste the link in the chat box there. Click on the link, you'll come to our website. It's simple. You can enter your email, your name, and your organization name, and then you can play around with the software for free.